You're going to focus on one thing in your life, focus on your metabolic system, and you'll watch everything else come into balance.
What is the state of metabolic health right now in the population?
Yeah.
And how do we get there?
We don't have an immune system problem. We have a metabolic problem. If you're eating anything in a box, anything with a label, you're now in a danger zone. We don't have real food in supermarkets. We have chemicals. So you are buying boxes of chemicals, and each one of these chemicals is doing something different.
The chemicals they put in our food, and ultra-processed food is one. What about the exposure of our food to glyphosate and other pesticides?
So glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. It manipulates and changes your hormonal system. The other thing it does is it actually drives heavy metals deeper into your brain.
Dr. Mindy, thank you so much for joining me on the Extend podcast. And I'm giggling a little bit because we just started talking about how I'm so proud that half the guests on my podcast are women.
Yeah.
And I was telling you that, that came from the fact that in my real practice of medicine, it's 50-50. It's 50% men, it's 50% women.
Yeah.
And I feel all the time when I'm talking to women that I'm not armed with enough knowledge because it's just really sad how all the research, all the attention on health outcomes, not all, but almost all, for a long time, has been so male-centric. And you're such an advocate for women's health. And you brought it to the forefront in my own consciousness because one of the first books I read of yours was Fast Like a Girl. And my wife was like, well, why are you reading Fast Like a Girl?
I love that. Oh my God, I love that. You know how many men bought Fast Like a Girl? A lot of them.
I bet, right? Because I bet a lot of doctors bought it too, like myself. I was like, I just need to know what is the science and research around fasting for women, because many women were having a really tough time with it. So before we even get into that, I'd love to ask you, from your vantage point, why are we in this situation where women feel kind of left behind in their health?
It's such a good question. And, I think I can answer it with my own clinical story, which is when I was first in practice, both men and women would come in, but especially the women would come in and they would say to me, like, I have X, Y, and Z symptom. My specialty was lifestyle. I loved giving them food ideas and detox and help them understand how their life affects their hormones. And they would, this is back in the 1990s, they would internalize that and say, I'm going to go run that past my primary care physician, what you just said. And I would never see them again. Fast forward 10 years from that point, and women were coming in droves, not just with one symptom. They were coming in with 5, 6, 7 different symptoms. And when I would sit with them and say, here's what we need to do lifestyle-wise, their response was always, thank you. And whatever you do, I do not want to go back to my primary care physician. My goal is to stay out of my primary care physician's office. And there was a turning point. And I have a lot of thoughts as to why there was a turning point. Toxins being a big one. But it was because the old paradigm of our healthcare system is like a dinosaur.
Right.
And they are very much one size fits all, and they are very much evidence-based. And by evidence-based, they mean we only do what research says. We only do what insurance companies cover. We have a very systematic way of doing it. But all of those studies were built off of mice, or they were built off of men. We do not study women. So, and then all of the medications, there are so many medications that have never been studied on women that we're dishing out left and right. So you have a very old school healthcare system that has completely left women behind.
Yeah. So what do you say to those people that is like, how different can it be? It's just one chromosome off.
Yeah.
Why is it so different for women and men?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you my new analogy that I use, and I'm not sure I told you this, but this is what I've been speaking about, is I think we really have to acknowledge that a woman's body is a lot more sophisticated. And I mean that with love to all the men out there, but it has to be more sophisticated because we house a baby. So whether you decide to have a baby or not, your feminine body was meant to house a baby, which means it came with a lot more features, more bells and whistles. I call it like a sophisticated violin. Like it needs to be finely tuned in order to play at its best, whereas a male body is more like a kazoo. You got like you.
I feel like a kazoo sometimes.
Literally, like you blow into it and it works. And I only mean that in all the right ways. But yeah, I mean, literally, like you are dealing with even though we're both humans, you're dealing with a way more sophisticated environment because we we're built to house babies.
Right. And I think part of that too is really a woman's body is more in tune with the cycles of the universe as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about circadian rhythms. We talk about, all of us humans are meant to live in a rhythmicity, right?
Yes, thank
and
you.
especially women. And
Yes.
that is never considered in anything medical. Like whenever you prescribe a medication or an intervention, you never ask a woman what part of your cycle you're in.
That is right.
Or when to time these interventions.
That's right. Do you know, when I was really deep into trying to understand how fasting matched to a woman's cycle, I found some really interesting studies that never get talked about. Here's one. That in the front half of a woman's cycle, her body makes more cholesterol. So her cholesterol is meant to naturally go up in the front half of her cycle.
Wow.
The reason for that is you need cholesterol to make estrogen. So now when she goes to get a blood draw, is she ever asked where in her cycle she is? She's just told, you have a high cholesterol, but never did they ask what part of your cycle. Second thing that is fascinating to me, right before a woman ovulates, there's a big dose of oxytocin that comes in.
Wow.
So that there's this feeling of love and bond and connection right before an egg comes out. And then did you know that the egg actually sends a chemical signal out to any of the sperm coming in to approach her? And that it's the chemical messages coming from the egg that determines which sperm she's going to let in to her. Like there's so many, when you break down the wisdom of the reproductive system, the wisdom of our eggs. Eggs have the most amount of mitochondria in them compared to any other body part. You realize how much rhythm is going on inside a female body.
Absolutely. And even the rhythm around just the entire lifespan of a woman too.
Yep.
There's a lot of, I would say you almost discount the entire time of menopause.
Yes.
Even menopause is discounted, I think. But
agreed.
Menopause especially because by the biology of a woman is almost, 80, 90 degrees change when going through menopause.
That's right.
And we don't change any of our interventions based on what part of a life cycle a woman's in, right?
Yeah. So my next book that I'm actually currently writing is really addressing what's the purpose of menopause.
Right.
Why do we live into our postmenopausal years? There's only 4 species. Only 4 species on the planet that live past their reproductive cycle.
Really?
We're one of them. 2 are whales, and the other one is like an insect or a frog or something of that kind.
Wow, I never knew that.
So women, as human women, spend 40 to 50% of their life in their post-reproductive years. Mm-hmm. There's only one other species on the planet that even comes close to that, and that's orca whales. They spend about 30% of their life in postmenopausal years. So my evolutionary curiosity is why are we built to live so long after menopause?
Yeah.
And I actually think I'm coming up with the answer.
I mean, does it have something to do around, like, orcas and humans are social beings in nature. And so I think it takes the grandmother or the mother of the mother to help. Am I on the right track here?
Yes, you got it. Oh my God, this is why I love you. It's like you and I, our brains think alike.
Yeah.
It's the grandmother. There's something called the grandmother hypothesis. Oh. And the grandmother hypothesis says that if we go back to our primal days and we look at the dynamics that happened in order for humans to stay alive, the robust humans, the young, the men, they went out and they were the hunters, and they went to go, and they were gone for days, and they would leave the cave life. Around the cave was the pregnant mom, the little babies or the little toddlers. So in order for her to stay alive, there had to be another person at the cave that took care of her, and that was the grandmother. So the belief of the grandmother hypothesis is that actually when our hormones go down, we have a brain change. I call it the brain remodel project. Old neurons get sloughed away and new neurons come on, and she starts to take on a brain that can see a more collective societal lens so that she knows, oh, mom needs to be able to go, I need to go get tubers. Like that was one thing that she did, is she picked up tubers and she came and brought that back to cave life. She needed to make sure that she was protecting the mom who was birthing babies. So there is a belief with this grandmother hypothesis that actually postmenopausal women are a bit of evolutionary heroines.
Yeah.
We would not be sitting here. Check this out. We would not be sitting here as humans right now if it wasn't for the postmenopausal woman.
Yeah.
Because
Makes total sense.
We would have perished. The hunters would have gone out,
right,
and they would have come back, and mom would have been dead if it hadn't been for the grandmother who had took care of her.
Wow. And do that for thousands of generations. Right. And obviously, like, you need women to live longer postmenopausally.
That's right.
And it makes complete sense. If you look at evolutionary biology, I think people tend to discount how much evolutionary biology really does matter. And so I'm a student of evolutionary biology.
I love it.
That's why I kind of thought through this with you.
Yeah.
And it makes complete sense, because a lot of why we do the things we do has a lot to do with evolutionary biology. Right. Did you know that the reason that we have morning people that love to wake up early in the morning, and we have night people that stay up late at night, is because in our primitive societies, you needed a certain percentage of the population to be able to stay up late to protect the rest of the society, to protect the rest of the clan. And so the reason we evolved in 4 different chronotypes is how we used to live together in these primitive societies.
Oh my gosh. I love that. That makes so much sense.
Right.
So when I put all the research together for Fast Like a Girl, I found something called the thrifty gene hypothesis. And it is also a piece of evolutionary biology. And it said that basically the humans that were able to survive long periods without food in those harsh conditions had a genetic profile that allowed them to metabolically switch into this ketogenic energy system. Right. And if you didn't have that genetic profile, you died, and therefore it's no longer in our gene pool. So right now what's happening is that we're actually going against our biology by eating all day. Right. By sitting on the couch and ordering DoorDash, by snacking 17 times a day is what they say. The average person puts food in their mouth 17 times a day. Wow. And they believe there's a theory with this thrifty gene hypothesis is the reason that diabetes is becoming so prevalent is because we are literally going against our genetics right now if we're eating all day and not saving these big windows for fasting.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. So on that point, let's go back to giving our audience a little brief history of medicine and healthcare,
let's do that. Yes,
and why we're here today in this point of just human society where, I feel like we figured out a lot. Like, we have incredible medications to treat cancer. We can do surgery on people. Yeah, we're more unhealthy now than we've ever been.
Yes.
And I'd love to hear kind of like your take on how we got here.
Yeah, and I love this. And I love that this conversation is going in this direction. I think that if you look back in history, you will see very clearly why this healthcare system we have right now is completely profit-driven and completely broken and has left the patient out. And so when the pandemic hit, our most current pandemic, I went and started looking at the last pandemic. That was the first thought I had was, what happened to us during the last pandemic? The Spanish flu happened in 1918. And I dove into studying all the pieces of that. Well, before the Spanish flu in 1918, there was a very well-respected disagreement in the healthcare world. Were we self-healing machineries? Was the body something that healed itself? Or and that maybe when a virus came into us, that it was really the severity of your symptoms was due to the host, or was it due to the virulence of the bacteria? So it was vitalistic, means that the body heals itself, or was it mechanistic, meaning something comes into the body and can affect it? And so they didn't know. They had no idea. And then the Spanish flu hit. And so now they had a test. Which direction was it going? And it was very much like this was interesting to me. The Spanish flu, that pandemic, 2.5 years. It ran its course, no vaccines, no antibiotics. It ran its course in 2.5 years. Sounds a little bit familiar to what we just went through, about a 2-year course.
Yeah, we gave everyone mRNA.
That's right.
Right.
And I mean, and then there's that.
Yeah.
But here's the point, is that we had a healthy discussion about this intelligence that lived inside the body before that pandemic. We had a healthy respect for the body healing itself. Then we had a fearful time with the Spanish flu. We lost a lot of people. And 2 years after the Spanish flu finished, penicillin was created. And when penicillin was created, it was an amazing moment. It was like, we have something that can kill bacteria, not viruses, but kill bacteria, and we're never going to go back into a pandemic again. And we started making antibiotics after antibiotics after antibiotics. And then the main contributor financially to penicillin was the Rockefellers. And the Rockefellers basically poured all their money into all this antibiotic research, more antibiotics to be made, and then they turned around and funded the medical schools. And then all of a sudden, they had the marriage of big pharma, and the medical profession was born, and this was in the 1920s. And as you know, it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until we are so profit-centered, we've lost focus of the patient.
Exactly. And so for the listeners that want to learn more about this, just look up Flexner report, Felxner. And this is a study that was funded by the Rockefellers that basically switched medical school from holistic to needing to have scientific evidence to do anything. Right. And so this whole kind of mindset around doing prescriptions, making a diagnosis of a disease, and then having a prescription for it is what set off kind of the entire Western medical system, that basically nothing happens unless you're diagnosed with a disease.
Right.
But the other thing the Flexner report did was completely discount any kind of holistic medicine, alternative medicine, all of it, because it couldn't be studied because it was more than one variable working together at the same time.
That's right. So, and on that, it's really interesting because we now, even in 2024, we have and this is happening in women's health, and is something that has been like nails on a chalkboard for me, is that we're really talking about it, that we need to give women evidence-based health care. Okay, evidence-based healthcare, the way it is being stated, is basically saying there needs to be a study that is done in order for us to say this therapy is going to be successful.
Right.
But the study has to be done on women, and we're not doing it on women. And if you're going to make it evidence-based, it needs to be put all the same women at the same age together in the same study. So we still have a bunch of gaps in this theory. Recently, I heard something that I love, which is, why don't we be evidence-led? Let's look at a study and go, that's interesting. Now, let's see how it applies to the person in front of me. But we're not doing that. No. We're like, the study says this, so therefore you get that.
Right.
And there's the vitalistic idea that the body heals itself, this idea that you have a different lifestyle perhaps than the person in the study, is not brought into the equation.
Not at all. And, one of the things I talk about all the time with my patients is I understand we have studies that tell us this particular intervention works.
Yep.
But what you have to understand is what these studies are telling you is what's happening in the middle of the bell-shaped curve.
That's right.
So you have people on both sides of this that either this intervention is working really well or it's not working at all or potentially even harming you.
Right.
And I think, for sure, like fasting falls into this,
That's
right? And so I think it's really important for people to know that for anything you try on your health, whether it be a pharmaceutical or a supplement or an intervention like fasting, understand that you're an N of one.
That's right.
You have to, right?
Yes. Yeah. So in Eat Like a Girl, I have a whole section on N of one.
Right.
Because the best way I look at it is like you look at a study or you see a health influencer on Instagram quote a study. what your brain should do is go, okay, that's interesting. I wonder how that applies to me. The study gets you in the ballpark, but you get to choose the seat you sit at.
Right.
So we can't just make this about everybody responds this way. Even to fasting. This was the whole purpose of Fast Like a Girl. Is it was like, okay, Dr. Osumi, he won the Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology in 2016 for a term called autophagy. He is a Japanese scientist. And basically what he discovered is that in the absence of food or the nutrients coming in, that there was this internal mechanism inside a cell that it started to heal itself. It pushed out all the bacteria, it pushed out all the viruses, it detoxed itself, it repaired its cellular parts, and it made itself anew again, which is really cool. He won the Nobel Prize in medicine and physiology for it. And then everybody started fasting. But then did we ever say, is there a time for a woman to stimulate autophagy in her cycle and a time not? Do menopausal women need to do more autophagy maybe or less? Like these are questions that many of them are not answered even today. But these are questions we need to bring up instead of just saying, he's the genius. This is what we follow. We need to bring it into more of this N of one.
Absolutely. And if you look at it that way, if it's an intervention that's not going to harm you, like, it takes a long time to harm you, like fasting, for example.
Right.
It's so much better instead of waiting for the studies to come out on this, which potentially will never happen, is to see how you react to it and to follow like a guide like have in your book and see how it works on you.
That's right.
Right?
The most common question I've probably answered over the years is, how long should I fast?
Oh, yeah.
And I always say, well, what are you trying to do?
Right.
Like, just because everybody is skipping breakfast, does that mean you're supposed to skip breakfast?
Right.
I don't know. Here, let me tell you the tools, and then you get to pick the tools and put the fasting lifestyle together that works for you.
I love that. So let's dissect fasting a little bit more, if you don't mind. So first, I want to take it a step back before even fasting. What is the state of metabolic health right now in the population?
Yeah.
And how do we get there?
Yeah. It's such a loaded question.
I know.
Okay, so let's start with this. When the pandemic hit, I was walking around going, we don't have an immune system problem. We have a metabolic problem. And
Such a wise statement.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right.
And we don't have a chronic disease problem. We have a metabolic problem.
Right.
If we fix the metabolic problem, we fix so many things. We don't have a menopausal moment. We have a metabolic mess that is contributing to this incredible array of symptoms that women are having. Every single health problem comes back to this metabolic marker. If you're going to focus on one thing in your life, focus on your metabolic system, and you'll watch everything else come into balance. So the stats are, before the pandemic, it was 20% of Americans were metabolically healthy. What that means is that they could regulate their blood pressure, their cholesterol, their glucose, their insulin, all on their own without medication. It also meant that they had to be a certain weight and that they had to have a certain circumference around their waist.
Right.
Only 20% of Americans can say that all those measurements fit into a normal range. After the pandemic, 9%.
Yeah.
9%. So there's a lot of reasons for it, but I know you've brought some of the experts on that are screaming this from the rooftop. We don't have real food in supermarkets.
Right.
We have chemicals. So you are buying boxes of chemicals, and each one of these chemicals is doing something different. So in Eat Like a Girl, I really wanted to profile a chemical or a group of chemicals called obesogens. Obesogens pesticides is one, by the way. Aspartame is an obesogen, by the way, that's in all these diet foods. And what these obesogens do is they literally hijack your stem cells. And the stem cells that were going to make some other body part actually start to get reprogrammed and make fat cells. And this is where a woman, this is happening to children right now too, where all of a sudden a woman says, I'm eating the same, I'm exercising the same, I'm doing everything the same, but I am gaining weight very, very quickly. The first question I asked in my clinic was like, give me a food diary. Tell me what you're eating. Right. And if you're eating anything in a box, anything with a label, you're now in a danger zone.
Right. Absolutely. I think, I love this concept of obesogens. Definitely the chemicals they put in our food and ultra processed food is one. What about the exposure of our food to glyphosate and other pesticides?
Okay. So glyphosate, thank you for bringing this up.
Yeah.
Glyphosate, when I started to look at the trends of all these women that were coming into my clinic with like multiple problems, thyroid being a big one, it was like they weren't showing up with one symptom anymore. They were showing up with like 4 and 5. It was right about the introduction of glyphosate into our environment.
Wow.
So glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor. It's a pesticide, and it's an endocrine disruptor. It manipulates and changes your hormonal system. The other thing it does is it actually drives heavy metals deeper into your brain. So if you have any kind of lead or any kind of mercury, which is we've done in my clinic, we tested thousands. I mean, you're doing it now here. Thousands of people, and not one person was low in lead or mercury. Everybody has got this in them.
Yeah, we find the same thing in our clinics.
Yeah.
Is pretty much ubiquitous that people have a very high level of some heavy metal, but particularly lead and mercury.
That's right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So now you have these heavy metals that may have not been like huge problems, and they weren't like ubiquitous within the environment. Of course, that's been getting worse. But glyphosate was the thing that ignited these heavy metals into the brain and drove it into the tissues. So it not only disrupted hormones, but it took these toxic metals and drove them into our tissues more. So this started to create more anxiety, more depression. This is where we started to see deeper thyroid problems, because when you drive chemicals, heavy metals into the thyroid, you shut down thyroid production. This is where we started to see things like even down into kids like autism and learning disabilities. This is where all of a sudden the menopausal symptoms, became this really huge. Suicide is like a big one that we see with menopausal women. Between 45 and 55 is the most common time for a woman to commit suicide. And I strongly feel that, yes, it's a hormonal challenge that's occurring during that moment, but it is the toxins in the environment, like glyphosate, that are driving many of these other toxins deeper into the tissue to do more damage.
So, it's really hard for people now because they're like, I can't eat produce because there's glyphosate on it. I can't eat food from the supermarket because it's all chemicals. Like, what am I going to eat now? How do you talk to your patients about making good food choices?
Yeah. Well, so in Eat Like a Girl, I came up with 5 principles, and I think this is the easiest way, because I don't know if you're experiencing this, but when I'm in conversation, I always ask people like, "Are you more confused about food now than ever?"
I hear that all the time with my patients, and so we really try to break through that. I'd love to hear your 5 principles. I'm pretty sure it's the talk tracks that I use too.
I'm sure
but
they're very similar.
Yeah,
but like my favorite meme I saw on Instagram the other day is, "I'm sorry I can't go to work today because I have to stay home and count my protein." It's like, I get it. Like, it's gotten really confusing. So, okay, first principle is that your blood sugar matters, calories don't. Now, we have plenty of research on calories that it counts, but I want to know the humans that are able to succeed at knowing every single day how many calories go in and how many calories are they outputting. That doesn't typically, I don't know a lot of people that can do that. No. But blood sugar, I can teach you how to read your blood sugar on a CGM. I can teach you how to feel energized after a meal so you know your blood sugar is stable. I can show you why your blood sugar tanks and you have to eat 6 times a day. We have to come back to balancing blood sugar. That it needs to be the most important thing.
So true.
In fact, I think if we put CGMs on every human, we would be out of this metabolic problem within months.
I'm a big fan of CGMs, and I interviewed Casey Means a few. I mean, she's a pioneer with Levels Health, but these are now available with no prescription.
Yeah.
So finally, people can take charge of their own health and go get these monitors at any drugstore.
Yep.
And they're not that expensive compared for the amount of value you get for your health.
That's right.
I think the amount of value, like you mentioned, that this is the one of the most valuable things that you can do for your health is to get a CGM and just learn about food. Like read your book while you have a CGM on. It'll change your life completely.
Yeah, like I think I've told people, put them on your kids. I don't know if you've ever put them on your kids.
Not yet, no.
But like put them on your kids and then let your kids eat and just have an experience with what food is doing for the blood sugar. In my clinic, what I used to do is the very first thing I did with women before I did any diet change, before I taught fasting, before we detoxed, is I put one of those on for 2 weeks. And I said, every single day you're going to send me a food diary and you're going to send me a snapshot of the chart of your glucose and we're going to talk.
Yeah.
And that was after 2 weeks, they were like, what do you need me to do? Where do I go? This is amazing, because they had real feedback information of what food was doing.
Right, exactly. You know, you said something really important earlier, and I think it kind of leads to my next question too, is that how to feel like you're energized with a stable glucose level.
That's right.
There's a misconception that people have that if I'm feeling low energy, I need more sugar.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And so talk about glucose curves and how this point really kind of, bring it home for us with this point that you need a stable glucose curve, not a spike.
Not a spiky one.
Yeah.
So the first thing to know is you have two energy systems, one that kicks in when you eat and one that kicks in usually around 12 hours of not eating. The one that kicks in when you eat is called your sugar burner system, and the other one I call the fat burner system, or it's the ketogenic energy system. So when we look at the sugar burner system, in order to keep that stable, there are some ground rules. And the first one is that medically what they say is when you eat something and you get a blood sugar spike, it should come back to its original levels within 2 hours after you eat that meal or you eat that piece of food. I've looked at enough blood sugar to see that doesn't happen for everybody. So it
doesn't happen for 91%, right?
That's right. That's right. So you have a couple choices then. I like to see it come back within an hour, like hour to 90 minutes, like it should come back to its original amount. So when we look at putting food together then, we need to make sure that we're either eating things that are low in the glycemic index or low on the glucose response, or we need to think about how we pair food. So, for example, like I'll use a chocolate cake I had one time. It was made by actually Chef Leslie, who did a lot of the recipes in my book. And she was at a retreat that I was at. She's plant-based, and I'm not plant-based. And I was like dreading that I was going to eat plant-based for 3 days. I was like, where is my meat? Because it stabilizes my blood sugar. Right. So I start testing. I had a CGM on. I start testing everything. And I get finally, everything's spiking, by the way. And I finally get to this chocolate cake she has. And she has put a massive amount of MCT oil in it. I go to eat the cake. The cake does not only does it not spike my blood sugar, it makes my blood sugar drop. It was a chocolate cake it had a little bit of honey in it, but she had doused it with MCT oil. It was and it was really fat rich. So the fat combined with the carbohydrate didn't cause the spike, and in this case, it actually made it drop. So how we pair food is as important as the glucose response of an individual food.
Yeah, that's so true. Some of the things that worked for me along the pairing food conversation that we're having right now is starting my meals with any kind of vegetable, any kind of non-starchy vegetable. I started doing that for every single meal now, including breakfast, because it completely turned my glucose curve into, spikes all day long to flat. Like literally, I'll go an entire day with a flat glucose curve just by eating a couple bites of vegetables to start with, like one portion or even less. Yeah. And I think, what I really try to emphasize to my patients, it's not about what you eat so much as long as you eliminate ultra-processed food.
Right. Agreed.
It's about the order and how you're eating that really makes a big difference, right?
Yeah. So something interesting I've seen on this, a new path my brain went, is that, the GLP-1 hormone is made from the microbes in our gut.
Right.
And those microbes get destroyed by fat, toxic fat. so ultra-processed foods. So if you actually want to help those microbes, upregulate the microbes so that they make the GLP-1 hormone, that there is studies showing that the order in which you eat food will determine how well those microbes will make that hormone that will kill hunger. And the order looks like fiber, vegetables, protein, carbohydrate. You should always eat the carbohydrate last. You should eat the vegetables first, and then the protein second, and then the carbohydrate. And that order helps those microbes get all those prebiotic fibers. They make the GLP-1 hormone, and it kills hunger in your head.
Exactly. And it's so true. And the CGM really brings that home for you because you could see what it does to your glucose curve, which is also kind of what it does to your hunger response as well, right? And I think there's a lot of shaming that goes on in social media for people that are taking GLP-1s, and they equate it to a lack of willpower. But in reality, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of it is due to how we've killed our microbiome and we've reduced this biological signal from the ultra-processed foods that we're eating,
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, on that topic, I mean, if we just call it what it is, we had ultra-processed foods, destroyed the microbes stopped making GLP-1, we start getting more hungry. Then those ultra-processed foods poured these obesogens in. All of a sudden, you're gaining weight faster than you ever did because the stem cells have been hijacked. And then those ultra-processed foods decided to spray things on there to create this incredible dopamine response in your head. So you're not making the hormone that kills hunger. You're eating foods that are making you fat, and you're addicted to those foods all because of what the food company did to you. So yeah, I mean, we should take the shaming and the guilt away. I'm not saying everybody should get on the drugs, but there should be maybe an entry point to those drugs and an exit point to those drugs. And then there should be a lifestyle that helps you rebuild these microbes that can make the GLP-1 hormone so you're not having to rely on the drug.
And that is exactly what we do here, Mindy. Like when we see patients, we don't put anyone on a GLP-1, number one, if they're not realistic about what they're trying to achieve, but number two, without them being on a really intentional plan to rebuild their own natural GLP-1 production.
I love that.
And that's the only way to do this right.
Yes.
Because then you're not going to be on it forever.
That's right.
And you're also going to be able to use this break or this time period where you're not as hungry to reform your relationship with food.
That's right.
Right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And again, it's back to like the question that or the conversation we had about what happened during the Spanish flu. It's like I almost feel like sometimes I just want to hit a pause button on the healthcare world for a moment and just be like, okay, everybody, sit down. I have a little story to tell you. We got so far off course. We are so far off course. And if you're not aware of what's in your food and what it's doing to you, you literally are signing yourself up for chronic disease. And this is what I think people are starting to wake up to. But we also have to get away from this idea that the doctor is going to save us. The person that's going to save you right now is you through knowledge, listening to podcasts like this, reading books, coming into clinics like this. That is what's going to save you right now. But if you're doing nothing, you have involuntarily signed yourself up for chronic disease, and you don't. And it's a shame. You don't even people. There's big-hearted, wonderful humans out there that don't understand this, and then they get a cancer diagnosis, or a loved one gets Alzheimer's, and they're like, "What's going on? I don't know what happened." This is where it's criminal. We need to change these two systems.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And back on the GLP-1 thing, I think all the listeners, if you are taking a GLP-1, you almost should be required to purchase a CGM and buy Eat Like a Girl or buy, one of these other books like Food by Dr. Mark Hyman. Like I require that of all my patients.
That's
like I'm not prescribing it unless you're reading at the same time, because the only way you're going to get yourself out of this horrific loop is to educate yourself.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't think we're used to that. I mean, the era in which you and I grew up in, you had a problem, you went to the doctor told you what the problem was, gave it a big fancy name, and then sent you home with a prescription.
Right.
That system doesn't exist. It exists, but it's not helpful at this particular moment.
Not for chronic disease, not for obesity, not for metabolic disease. It doesn't work for that. And there's temporary Band-Aids, but you got to get off this roller coaster of just going back and forth through this and never really winning this battle.
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you mentioned 5 things. So
Yes,
one is metabolic health.
We haven't even got to the other one. Okay, the second one is kind of ties into this. Let's keep it simple for people. Eat nature's food, not human-made food. So your farmers markets, the outside of your grocery stores, anything without a label. Like when we go to eat food that just came from the earth, and that's not just plant-based food. I mean, if you eat meat, I'm personally a fan of eating meat. Like anything that the earth has provided for us is great. The minute we start to put a label on it, now you need to know what those ingredients are. And you have to be an expert. And even those of us that know what those ingredients are, they change them, they manipulate them. It's really hard to understand.
They try to trick you with those labels.
Yeah,
right.
Like natural flavors. Natural flavors is on the front of packaging, and basically they can hide chemicals in the term natural flavors on an ingredient label.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen that.
It's crazy.
It's not, if they have to say natural flavors and tell you it's natural flavors, it's a trick.
It's a total trick. And then they put on the front, it's natural.
Right.
Like that means nothing. So I think like if we could just, instead of like I had contemplated with Eat Like a Girl, like having lists upon lists of all these ingredients. And instead what I chose to do is pick the most harmful ingredients. And then I have a whole section on how to read an ingredient label.
Right.
Because I thought if I can teach how to the basics of an ingredient label, and then I can just say, just look at your food and go, is it nature's? Did nature provide this? Did it have to go into a lab and be manipulated? Like how much of this food, when you read the ingredient, are there words you understand in there? Like let's try to bring it back to that 5th grade level. Right. And I think that will help people. Oh,
it's massive help for people just to understand what an ultra-processed food is and how to avoid them. And, it's hard to avoid it 100% of the time. But
really hard.
Yeah, if you get to 80%, it can be a massive improvement on what people are doing right now.
Yeah, agreed. Right? Agreed.
Third thing?
Okay, third one. This is my favorite one. Feed your microbes, not your taste buds. Okay. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have things that are tasty, but I've sat with too many women that are struggling with their cravings. And what they do when a woman can't overcome her cravings is she turns on herself. She calls herself undisciplined. She feels guilty because she dove into some food that she couldn't control and get over her cravings. She shames herself because she can't lose weight because of her cravings. And she thinks it's all within her control. And so I wanted to put that third principle in there because these microbes actually tell your brain what foods to crave. The most popular one that people know is Candida. Right. Candida is a fungus that lives in your gut, and in order for it to stay alive, it says, give me sugar, give me carbohydrates, give me alcohol. And then you can't get over that. You're like, I don't know how to get off sugar. I have a sugar addiction, but you don't realize there's literally a fungus in your gut. So in both Fast Like a Girl and Eat Like a Girl, the whole idea of a fasting lifestyle where you go a certain period without food and then you're really intentional about what foods you bring in, specifically polyphenol, probiotic, prebiotic foods. And if you start to create a pattern and a rhythm between fasting and these what I call 3 Ps, these prebiotic, probiotic, polyphenol foods, you change your microbiome. And when you change your microbiome, all of a sudden your cravings go away.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so empowering to know that your cravings are not a failure of your willpower.
That's right.
These are just biological signals that you need to learn how to modify with science.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And but here's the difference. We started this between men and women.
Yeah.
Here's the difference for women, and this is why I'm so vocal about this, is that women continually turn on themselves. They think it's their problem. Why can't I look like the person on Instagram? Why can't I be a size 2? And it's always my fault, my fault, my fault. Did they ever stop and think that something like the birth control pill actually created a gut dysbiosis? Were they ever educated that when you're on the birth control pill for 2 decades, it changes the microbes in your gut? And that change in the microbes in your gut actually starts to change what the foods that you crave. This is like the nuance that needs to start happening to free women because we think it's our fault.
Or the Midol that you take, you're given when you're going through menopausal symptoms. Like that's like a nuclear bomb for your gut bacteria, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just mind-blowing that no one's ever talked about that until now. Yeah. Okay, what's number 4?
Okay, number 4 is protein is the hero macronutrient.
Protein is a hero macronutrient. Okay.
So, I think protein has come into vogue, pretty quickly, like the conversation around protein. Yes. And I like that. I think that, in the book, I have something called the Key 24, which are the 24 nutrients that women need to get into their bodies on a regular basis in order to make a hormone. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at these Key 24, 9 of them are amino acids. So you need amino acids to make hormones. You need amino acids to make neurotransmitters. So you get amino acids in protein. Now, in animal protein, you're getting all the essential ones. You're getting, you get a more complete array. Mm-hmm. But in the book, it's, I had one of the chefs who made recipes in this book was a plant-based chef. Yeah. And so I put all the different plant-based proteins that can help you get those amino acids.
That's great.
But either way we look at this, we have to bring protein into the conversation. And every time you put a meal together, where's the protein? Always make sure there's protein there.
Yeah, and for vegetarians or vegans, as long as you the source of the vegetables, and you can get the right proteins in, it's not impossible to get these amino acids from vegetables, right?
Right. That's right. And I think that was a big mistake that happened when we started to get this big wave of protein conversation on social media. I think we went from a place of going low carb, where we're like, carbs are bad, and everybody got away from carbs, and then we were sort of stuck and didn't know what our next nutritional move was, right? And then protein came in, and everybody was like, you need protein. And then it was like, it can only be animal protein. And then all the plant-based people were like, wait a second, what about me? Mm-hmm. And so what I try to do with Eat Like a Girl is really sit down and go, protein's everywhere. It's in plants, it's in animals. Let's just get a lot of it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do you dial in the dosage of protein for the women that you're seeing? Because there's all sorts of numbers thrown out there. And once again, everyone's an N of 1. So how do you help women dial this in?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think there's 2 things we look at. One, I like the 1 gram of protein for every pound of ideal body weight.
That's a key number,
yes.
right? Ideal body weight.
Ideal. Right. So if you're 160, but your ideal is 130, you want 130 grams of protein. So you're not trying to eat for your weight that you don't want to be. So that would, I'm a fan of that. I'm also a fan of that first meal. This is why in Eat Like a Girl, I had a whole chapter on the first meal matters, that you have to get at least 30 grams of protein. I like that idea. That's easy. That's a chicken breast. That's a cottage cheese, I think, is like,
4 eggs.
Yeah. 6 eggs.
6 eggs. Okay.
6 eggs. It's a cup of cottage cheese. It's not a ton. I mean, 6 eggs is a lot, but you could put it in an omelet.
Yes.
So I like that, and I like the idea that it opens up these amino acid receptor sites, and it makes it so that your body starts pulling in the amino acids from everything after that. What I don't like is that I don't want women counting anymore. No. We have gone from counting calories to counting the number on the scale to counting macros. So in Eat Like a Girl, I talk about it, but then I'm like, we got to free ourselves from all this counting. So that's my only complaint about all of that.
The way I talk about that with my patients is it's a win just to get protein at the first meal of your day.
There you
because everyone is so used to having a very carb-rich meal at the beginning of the day.
Yeah.
And that carb-rich meal at the beginning of the day, we all know, you know this too, it completely throws off your metabolism for the rest of the day.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So just starting with protein, let's just start with protein.
That's right. Yeah,
and then automatically you're going to switch to eating less carbs.
That's right.
And I think that's a massive win. And then that win, you want to pile up the wins, right?
Right.
So
I like that.
You win there, and then maybe later you add more protein. You're not counting it. You're just adding a little bit extra. Maybe you're having cottage cheese and eggs. And those kind of things are really helpful. Because I agree with you. I think there's so much counting. And it's is disempowering sometimes to have to count so much. Because you get fatigue. You get counting fatigue, right?
So like back to the CGM conversation, what I did with my patients is we would just put it on until they had mastery over their food. Then we took it off. And we were like, okay, now you have a sense of how you're supposed to feel. Now it's like taking the training wheels off. Let's take the training wheels off, and now let's see how you put combinations together. Right. But if we have to count everything and that rigidity, you can't sustain that over time.
No, there's such an important point with CGMs and with any wearable. If you're someone that gets paralysis by overanalysis of the data, or it even sends you backwards, some people get a stress response to all this data. Just tell yourself in your brain that this is a temporary data collection for you to change your habits, and then you can stop it. Right. I think most people only need to wear a CGM for maybe 6 weeks, and then they figure it out, right?
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I put it, 6 weeks is good. And then I tell people, like, put one on in January after the holidays, put one on after a vacation, because you can kind of slip a little bit, and it's helpful to just sort of know where you're at.
Right. Okay, what's number 5, just so we're complete?
Yeah, number 5 is fat doesn't make you fat. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a pretty common one. We've been talking about it for a while, but what most women specifically don't know is you need good fat to make hormones, specifically omega-3s. Yeah. And, I'm a huge fan of olive oil. I drizzle olive oil all over my food. It's high in polyphenols, and I get extra virgin organic, extra virgin olive oil. It's got great omega-3s. I'm a huge fan of wild salmon. I have it a couple times a week. Leaning into omega-3s, because if you don't have enough omega-3s, you don't have enough ingredients to make hormones. Right. But when we went low fat, or, I don't want fat to have too much calories in it, like we start to manipulate fat and withdraw fat out of a woman's diet, and now we have a hormonal problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Great 5 points. I love all of them. The last one reminds me also of going back to the history of medicine, how we got to this problem in the first place, is another kind of negative thing that happened during our lifetimes is this war on fat and war on cholesterol, right? Yeah. And it was all from misguided science, from misinterpreting of the data, and then doctors and scientists digging their heels in because they didn't want to say they were wrong.
That's right.
We were wrong. Cholesterol is not bad for you.
Yeah.
Dietary cholesterol for very few people leads to elevation of blood cholesterol. And and same with fat. Like, fat is not what's making people fat for the most part, right? And I think it's an important point to bring up.
The other thing on fat that I've really been trying to really get across to people is that if there's the fat on your body, like if you have extra adipose tissue, the tendency is to look at yourself again and label yourself undisciplined, or some people give it the genetics. Oh, it's my genetics. But if we actually break down what adipose tissue is, it's just storage for excess. Mm-hmm. Our bodies are so brilliantly designed that our bodies decided, I have too much glucose, I have too much insulin, I have too many chemicals that are coming in, I have too much synthetic estrogen that I don't know what to do with. I have a decision to make. I can either put all that excess around your heart, your lungs, your liver, the vital organs, or I can actually store it somewhere that isn't going to shorten your life. So I'm going to put it around your belly, I'm going to put it around your face, I'm going to put it on your booty, I'm going to put it on the back of your arms, because that's a better storage spot than your vital organs. And then we go and we look in the mirror and we just ridicule it. And the body's like, what? I was like saving your life. You fed me all these foods. You gave me all these toxins. I didn't know where to put them. So I put them somewhere that saved your life. And now you're mad?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy.
Right? Like when you think of it through that lens. So fat, not just the fat on our body, but the fat in our food has been so misrepresented.
Yeah. That's so true. And, I also, when I have this conversation with people about fat, men and women, we have the conversation about visceral fat and how that's particularly dangerous, and how cortisol levels being elevated leads to more visceral fat well. So there's a big connection between fat and stress, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, so in my world, we spend a lot of time helping women lose weight of all different ages. Mm-hmm. I have seen so many different patterns of weight loss. And the one pattern that fasting won't help, food won't help, that is really a tough struggle is the chronically stressed out woman. Mm-hmm. And it could be trauma from a childhood that's left over, that has her cortisol system completely on high alert all the time. Or it can be that she's so stressed out because of life. And what I try to get across to those women is when cortisol is high in the body, your body thinks it's running from a tiger. Right. It doesn't matter if you're sitting at your desk. It thinks you're in a life-threatening situation, and that you are running from a wild animal that's going to eat you and kill you. And in that moment, there is no room for weight loss. There is no room for hormone balancing. There is no room for anything other than get up and go. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I always tell women is if you are in your office and something stressful hits you, the best thing you can do is get up and walk around the floor, take a walk around the block. Cortisol is meant to make you move. If you don't move with cortisol, then all your body only has one choice, but to store it as fat.
Yeah, absolutely. So true. And the thing that I can add to that is, and the reason that works so well is that the time it takes for psychological stress to become a physiological stress. So by physiological stress, I mean an elevation of your cortisol levels.
Yep.
There's a time period in there, and it's about 30 to 45 minutes for most people before the cortisol really starts rising. And so if you can take a break from that psychological stress signal by doing the things that you talked about, taking a walk around the block, you know, just doing something a little bit different. Even like, you know, a lot of us are stressed out in front of our computers all day long, and putting a timer there that every 30 to 45 minutes reminds you to take a quick break. That cuts off that signaling from the psychological stress to the physiological stress and keeps cortisol levels low.
Ooh, that's amazing.
It really works. And another negative aspect of cortisol is that it stacks. And what I mean by that is when your body's used to a certain level of cortisol secretion, when you increase stress without taking a break from it, your body resets the amount of cholesterol it secretes to a much even higher level. And so you have to take these breaks to lower your cortisol. And sometimes it's a longer break. Like, you know, we need to do self-care on a daily basis, in my opinion, or take our vacations or take our weekends, all these things that you talk about a lot. That's why it helps.
You know what I'm thinking, because I was just having this conversation with a friend earlier today, how we are meant, and you brought it up in this context, is we are meant to, both men and women, to be rhythmic. Women are more rhythmic than men because we have more hormonal rhythms. But if you look at the nervous system, we're meant to go into fight or flight, and then we're meant to go into the parasympathetic rest and digest. If you look at the hormonal, a woman's menstrual cycle, we're meant to have periods where we have estrogen, and then we're meant to have periods where we have progesterone. I've heard even our microbes have a circadian rhythm that they change guard according to if it's night or if it's day. So the body is completely rhythmic. Now, when we look at the world, we know there's a night and day. We know there's a summer and a winter. We all agree that nature has rhythms. What we are not all pointing out is that the human body has rhythms. And when you don't honor those rhythms, you end up in dysregulation. And once you're in dysregulation, everything starts to fall apart.
That is so true. I mean, we completely have forgotten that we live according to the rhythms of the universe because we don't go outside to even experience them anymore.
And this was fasting. It was like, you know, the big aha I saw so many people have with Fast Like a Girl was, oh, wait, I was meant to go a long time without food. That's actually how I was designed, was to rest from food. Like, yeah. That makes so much sense. When you look at stress, you were designed to rest from stress. You were designed to rest from hormonal surges. You were designed to have these periods of recalibration, and we just don't honor them enough.
Absolutely. Wow. I mean, people are going to learn so much from your book, because I assume that you're also talking about fasting and Eat Like a Girl as well, right? And so that's it's kind of like this overall paradigm for weight loss and eating well to maintain optimal biology and physiology.
Well, with Fast Like a Girl was really interesting how the world consumed that book, because I had been teaching it in my clinic. I had seen it work. I taught it on my YouTube channel. People were grabbing it and doing really well with it. So I knew that women had to have this rhythmic style to fasting. Then it just took over the world. It was like we sold 800,000 copies in the matter of 2 years. Women just gobbled it up.
It's a great book.
Yeah,
it
thank
really
you.
is.
Thank you.
And, I think for even men to just learn about the biology of fasting and why it helps.
Yep.
Can we talk about that a little bit? Like,
Yeah.
so what are the benefits of fasting? We mentioned autophagy already.
Yep.
What are some of the other benefits?
Well, growth hormone. Growth hormone surges even with 13 to 14 hours of fasting. And growth hormone, you lose it after 30, and you need it for production of every other hormone.
Right.
So it's a precursor to that. Inflammation goes down. Autophagy gets stimulated at like 17 hours. Intestinal stem cells at 24 hours of fasting come in and start to repair the gut. 36 hours of fasting, your body really goes and finds that storage, all the body weight around the circumference of your waist and all the places you don't want the extra weight.
Fat.
The visceral fat, it starts to burn that. 48 hours, you get a whole dopamine reset. In 72 hours, the whole immune system resets itself.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, back to our evolutionary biology discussion, is the reason it does that is because in a short, 3-day fast, you have to get stronger. You have to get better in order to go find food. Right. Otherwise, you and I wouldn't have been. We wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah, and you said in 12 hours you start making ketones, which is an alternate form of energy as well. So, do you advocate like a 12-hour fast, or how do you recommend just practically for the listeners? How can they start a fasting protocol?
Yeah, I think the first thing to do is start looking at your day as you have eating windows and fasting windows. So, and the fasting window starts the night before. So if the last thing you put in your mouth is at 8 o'clock at night, then 4 hours to midnight is, so now you're 4 hours in. And then if you go all the way till 11 o'clock the next morning without food, you've done 15 hours without any food. And that's an amazing amount of time for all of these neurochemical shifts to happen. So, and then at 11 o'clock, you open up your eating window. And now you're eating within your eating window. And, if you want to snack 7 times a day within the eating window, fine. Yeah. But the idea is that then you close the eating window down at 8 and the fasting window starts again. So I think it starts with a mindset. And then what I used to do with my patients is I would have them just push their breakfast back an hour, maybe push their dinner up an hour. Right. And we would slowly train them into these windows, and usually within 2 weeks, they could successfully be in like a 16-8, 16 hours of fasting, 8 hours of eating.
Right. And then what about the longer term fast, like the 72-hour fast? How often do you recommend those?
Yeah, those are my favorite.
Yeah.
That's where life really changes for people. Twice a year, I think is good. We do one every January. In fact, last year we had 100,000 people worldwide.
Amazing.
Online. Yeah, online doing a global fast together.
Do you do this every year?
We started doing it every year a few years back. Last year was the biggest. We will do another one this year.
Great.
So,
Is it every January?
Every January.
Every January. Yeah. Okay, because I think this podcast will probably come out end of December or so.
Perfect.
So maybe people can join the fast in the
January.
January.
Just go to my website, drmindipelz.com, and there'll be a link there to sign up. And it's free. It's completely free.
And then that's fantastic. Thank you for doing that for the world. What about, so that 72-hour fast, during that time, you're allowed what?
Yeah, so within a 3-day water fast, the goal is to really get the blood sugar to come down, and now you're in this ketogenic energy system. So we don't want you raising blood sugar at all. Right. So you can have black coffee without any creamer. You want it clean. You don't want it with mold or pesticides. This isn't like popping down to your franchise coffee store. You want just clean black coffee. You can have tea, again, no creamer. You can have water. You can have mineral water. Element Tea has put out an amazing new. Have you tried their soda can? It's not necessarily.
No, I haven't.
They have a black cherry lime that's to die for.
Oh, okay.
And it has sodium, potassium, and magnesium in it. Those you can do in a fast. So there's several things you can drink, but you're not eating.
Yeah. And what I find is after you get past about 24 hours, you're just not hungry anymore.
You're not hungry.
Right?
Yeah.
I think those ketones turn off that hunger signal a little bit.
Ketones turn off hunger. I think a lot of people realize that they actually eat for other reasons. Yeah. And so that's what, I create a Fast Like a Girl journal that if people want to dive into the emotional reason they may eat, because we discovered that a lot of people would hit maybe hour 30 and they would be like, well, I'm not I'm not hungry, but I'm really depressed. And it's like, yeah, you lost that ability to eat, to soothe yourself. So your relationship to food, you see very clearly.
And then when you're a woman and you're fasting like a girl, what do you need to change month over or week to week when on your fasting schedule?
It's a great question. So the 2 times in a woman's cycle that she's got to be careful to not fast too much. The first is ovulation. So that would be like day 10 to day 15. And the reason for that is that you have a little bit of progesterone that comes in during that time, and progesterone doesn't like cortisol to go up. So we like to keep cortisol down so that progesterone can make her appearance. The week before your period, progesterone is incredibly high. You need progesterone to be high so the uterine lining can shed. So you should not be fasting because you don't want to raise cortisol.
Got it. And then are there some people that shouldn't be fasting? Do you not recommend fasting for certain groups of people?
Yeah, another great question. If you're pregnant, this is not your tool. If you're nursing, you don't want to fast more than 17 hours because you'll stimulate autophagy, which is your own natural detox, and all those toxins will go into breast milk and into your baby. So those are absolutely no with pregnancy, no longer than 17 hours when you're nursing. Outside of that, eating disorders, I really recommend that you work with your professional, whoever's helping you. I've seen people's relationship to food dramatically change when they learn to build a fasting lifestyle, but I really would encourage people to walk that journey with some kind of practitioner. Pre-diabetes, diabetes, those are the ones that people usually go, oh, I can't fast, right? And it's like, no, actually, you're the one that should fast.
You should be fasting.
But make sure your doctor's involved in that process with you.
Yeah, absolutely. One other group I think that I talk to, or I try to meter fasting in a little bit later in their journey, is when they're eating absolutely zero protein and they're just losing skeletal muscle mass.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to get them 3 good meals of just even some protein in until we kind of fix their diet a little bit.
Yeah, and some people, that brings up an interesting point. For some people, the door into fasting is to clean up food.
Right, absolutely.
So if you clean up food first, you might find fasting a lot more effortless. I had a really interesting experience a couple of years ago with an actress who was very public about her eating disorders. And she came to me, but she had lost her cycle. And she had come to me for help with her metabolic switch, basically. Now, I know if I got her fasting, we would start to clean up some of the, she had, she was also, believe it or not, she was super thin and she had a high hemoglobin A1C. She was insulin resistant.
Yeah, so skinny fat kind of.
Skinny fat. So we spent a couple of months just working on her food system. And it was like little things, like she was putting oat milk in her coffee. Okay, I needed to try to shift that. She was eating plant-based meals that were really deficient in fiber and deficient in good fat and deficient in protein, so we need to add that in. We did that for a couple of months and just changed her relationship to food, and then I tacked on a fasting window. And the next, she was one of the shows that she did was a Netflix series. And when she went to go film the next season, she was like, oh my gosh, I have so much energy for when I'm actually on set. But what was startling to me is when I came back to food after a day of being on set, I had this beautiful relationship to food that I'd never had before. So I just went in through a different door. And I think what happens is we fall into these absolutes in healthcare. We're like, oh, if you have an eating disorder, you shouldn't fast. No, there's some nuance here. I mean, the only absolute that I say is the first 2 I started with. If you're pregnant, absolutely no, this is not your tool. If you're nursing, don't go more than 17 hours. Otherwise, everybody else with the right practitioner working with them is going to benefit from fasting.
I love that. And some people should seek out the help of a nutritionist or some coach to help them through all of this. I think it gets overwhelming for people, especially if there's a lot of things they need to change,
That's right.
And so there's professionals that know how to do this correctly. And, a lot of them have been educated by you. So thank you for doing that as well. I want to highlight a point that we just brought up and not gloss over it, is that even if you don't have extra fat on your body, there's a chance that you have metabolic disease.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
That's why there's only 9% of people
That's right.
in America that have no metabolic disease.
That's right.
It's not just 9% that are thin, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of thin people out there that
That's
have
right.
trouble with their metabolism. And so fasting can certainly help those people as well.
Yes.
Right?
And there's two things to say on that.
Yes.
First, I'm always going to be the voice of women because so many women get frustrated because their skinny husbands are like, well, I don't need to fast. I don't need to try to lose weight. But if you put their hemoglobin A1C numbers next to each other,
Right.
you would see that actually skinny hubby may be in more of a metabolic mess than a woman who's gaining weight. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing is that I think we have to start to look at this hemoglobin A1C as this number that is a gold standard for where we are with health, and get off the frickin' scale.
Right.
Because
Agreed.
the scale is not telling us. I had an experience where I was at the Olympic Museum in Lake Geneva, and there was this beautiful picture of all the gold medal winners in all the different sports, and they did a whole picture for women and a whole picture for men. These are our athletes. They all were gold medal winners. I literally took my camera and went across the whole picture. If you saw the diversity in body types,
Exactly.
there is no way you can tell me there is one average weight number that we all need to buy into. We are just built, all of us are built different. So that scale, I mean, we should stop the scale. The scale
so
should be
powerful.
just thrown away.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I tell all my patients, like, the only kind of scale, if you want to scale at your house, only one you should have is one that gives you your skeletal muscle mass.
There
That's
you go.
the number you need to be following.
There you go.
And just
Perfect.
look at the directionality of it, right? And that way, that gives you an indication of how much you need to go strength train, how much you need to protein you're eating, all those kind of things.
That's
I agree with you fully. That really, and many people don't know what their hemoglobin A1C
That's
is.
right.
It's one of those numbers everyone just needs to know what it was at its last measurement, right?
I know. And full transparency, I just did a bunch of blood work with you, and mine was 5.1. I'm not happy with that. I actually wanted to be under 5. So it was a beautiful observation for myself to be like, okay, time to go into some longer fast, time to tighten some things up. And, I'm sure you might have not even noticed that. And I think most doctors would have been like, oh, it's great, it's 5.1. But for my metabolic brain, I was like, I can do better.
Right.
And when we look at like things like anti-aging, you want to have a hemoglobin A1C down to around 4.7, 4.8. That's a little bit better.
Yeah, I try to get my patients to aim directionally for 5. If they're at 5.2 or below, I'm so happy.
Yeah.
But then the number I started looking at after that actually is insulin, because insulin is more of a leading indicator, and fasting insulin actually. And we try to get that number under 10, and under 5 is like your metabolism is on point.
Yeah.
And then the CGM is obviously another great way to look at where you're at as well. So these are such important numbers, and they've just now become available to people, right?
Yeah. But like with hemoglobin A1C, if you're not out of range, they're not going to tell you. Yeah. So this is why, like, almost every podcast I'm on, I'm like 5.0, get yourself there. Go look at it. If it was 5.3, you probably didn't get a talking to, right? So go and look and hold yourself accountable.
Yeah. I just had Dr. Chatterjee on, and it's so funny how these numbers are so arbitrary too, because in the United States, we tell you have prediabetes if you're 5.7 or above. In London, it's 6 and above. It's like by the time you're at 5.7 or 6, like you have a real problem.
Yeah, you do.
So you got to, and it takes 30 years to get there sometimes, 20 to 30 years to go from 5 to 6.
That's right.
So you want to know early.
Yep.
And you want to check frequently so you know if you're heading in the right direction or the wrong direction.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Let's have a quick conversation around movement, exercise, especially for women, and how that differentiates than your men that you talk to.
Okay, this is a great question. Yeah. What I want women to know is that at 40, as your hormones are starting to decline because the ovaries are going into what I call retirement, they're like, hey, at 40, they're like, peace out. It's going to take me about 10 years. I'm going to go into retirement. I'm going to stop making as many sex hormones. So I'm going to hand the job over to another organ, and that organ is your adrenal glands. So if you come racing into your 40s and you're incredibly stressed out, and you combine that stress with like marathon running or Spartan training, or I don't want to diss CrossFit because there's some good things around CrossFit, but you're doing extreme exercise, there's a large chance you're going to tank your hormones even more because the adrenals can't handle the cortisol load.
Or even the women that are still looking at calories in, calories out, and spending 3 or 4 hours on a treadmill every week, right? That too, right?
Yeah, and and then cortisol is going up and the weight loss is stopping because now your body is like, wait, cortisol is around all the time. We just shut down burning fat. So when we look at exercise, especially for women over 40, I'm a huge fan of variation. Like you should be doing yoga. And I love the strength training. We'll talk about that in a minute. You should be strength training. You should be walking or hiking. You can do HIIT training. That's fine. But you should have a variation of all of that.
Right.
And I think we all pick our favorite thing. And then we're like, just do it over and over and over again. So I like women to look at like HIIT training. HIIT training can actually, like a 20-minute HIIT training workout can improve growth hormone. Growth hormone goes up, helps balance your hormones and the other hormones. Yoga, amazing for nurturing your parasympathetic nervous system. But maybe your yoga after 40 is not hot yoga where the room is like 120, and you're doing it extreme. Maybe it's more of like a yin yoga where you're holding a position longer. What about hiking? I don't think we give walking enough credit.
Right.
But like walking in nature, there's science showing that that'll actually lower cortisol. Now, cortisol comes down and your adrenals are like, okay, maybe I'll make you a little more estrogen. Maybe I'll make you a little more progesterone. So we've got to start to have more variation, especially after 40. The other thing that I'll point out on women and exercise that I've literally become obsessed with because I think it hits all these marks, and it goes back, I think, to the grandmother hypothesis, which is rucking.
I was just going to say this. Rucking is one of the best forms to get all of this in one, right?
So, okay, so I'm 55.
Yeah.
I was a competitive tennis player in my younger years, and then I became a chronic runner. And then in my 40s, I started getting injured all the time, and I stopped running. And I missed that cardiovascular. So this year, put on a 16-pound vest, and I started going up hills. And I found my cardiovascular system was being worked as much as if I was running without a vest on a flat level. And I was like, this is really interesting. I'm getting the cardiovascular improvement. Then I dove into the research, and I started to see that they're showing rucking for menopausal women is stopping osteoporosis.
I believe it. Yeah.
Now, think about the mechanism behind that, because you've added weight, so the bones have to stay stronger so that they don't end up weakening, because you need extra bone strength to be able to do this rucking thing that you're doing.
Right.
Then I started studying the grandmother hypothesis, and I'm like, oh my God, I bet the grandmother, when she was foraging for tubers, probably had to take a toddler, plop her onto her back, and carry the toddler out to go hunt for plant-based food to bring back to mom so mom could stay alive. So I think rucking is designed, is part of the evolutionary design for menopausal women.
I mean, if you look at evolution, especially for women, it absolutely becomes evident that this is what our bodies were designed to do.
That's right.
Humans were designed to move and walk. I mean, that's why there's humans all over the world, is because we walk there.
That's right.
And we did it with stuff.
Right. That's right.
Right? We didn't always have carriages and cars and horse carriages. We did it walking with stuff that we're carrying, especially kids. And so it makes absolute sense. So
posture, this is something interesting. I've visited countries. You and I, when I was at your house, we were talking about places we've gone.
Yes.
For example, I spent some time in Haiti,
right,
where they carry everything on their head.
Right.
Okay, well, what does carrying everything on your head do? Well, it causes you to come upright. It actually improves the curve in your neck so that you keep all this, and the curve in your low back, so you have some spring and bounce within your curve. Mm-hmm. So actually head carrying, carrying baskets, carrying weight on your head, is actually really beneficial. I'm sure the cave grandmother did that.
Exactly.
With the toddler on her back, and she probably gathered with a basket and put the basket on her head, and she didn't realize that she was actually keeping her body in better shape than what we're currently doing.
Absolutely. And the other fact about rucking too is it is does wonders for your balance and your ability to stay mobile.
That's right.
As well. And I think the lack of mobility, I mean, I don't think this is well known. The lack of mobility that we get as we age is what leads to falls, which is the number one cause of demise after the age of 70.
That's right.
You're much less likely to fall if you're rucking for the years and years before that.
Right.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing on fitness for menopausal women is looking at hand strength.
Grip strength?
Grip strength. So they're saying that actually grip strength is a predictor of aging. Right. Well, I interviewed on my podcast a movement expert, Katie Bowman, one of the top performing podcasts we've done. And she talked about a movement diet. And she said, we have to make sure as we age that we're looking at movements like chopping in the kitchen, whisking, like kneading with our hands, that those movements are actually important for our longevity to keep that hand strength strong, because that grip strength is important for getting out of a chair, for reaching and pulling things. It's for functionality as we age. So any exercise or anything we do in a day that improves grip strength, and cooking is one of them, we're going to start or pulling or pushing, and all that hand movement is going to make sure that your functionality as you age is at its best shape, because you're not losing that grip strength.
Wow. So, I mean, this whole tendency of just buying prepared food.
There you go.
It's just actually the act of making the food is keeping you stronger.
Yes.
And also mentally stimulating as well.
Yeah.
So for men and women, this whole world that we live in, where everything is so comfortable, everything just comes on demand, is actually really affecting our strength and our brains, all of it, right?
Yeah. Like when you really look at how we're designed, you see how off course we've gotten.
Right.
And then we can, we talked a lot about chronic disease, but I really believe that the suffering that's happening in menopause right now is because we didn't ask ourselves, how are we designed to be through this process? And when we look at movement, we were designed for things like rucking. My mom is 85 years old, and she is so mentally sharp. And there's a couple things I've decided she does. She goes out into her garden every single day. She pulls the weeds out. She gets her hands in dirt. She bends down and she squats so that she can tend to her garden, and then she comes inside and she does puzzles. And then when she's done doing puzzles, she goes and sits on the couch and reads a book and does crosswords. She's actually tapping into her evolutionary design of like problem solving, of bending, of squatting, of reaching, of getting hands in dirt. And she's not pulling tubers out, but she's pulling out weeds. There's a simple lifestyle that we have gotten so far away from that is causing this hormonal mess that so many women are experiencing.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think step one of regulating your hormones as a woman is just getting your lifestyle back to this lifestyle of movement and eating with nature, all of this, right? And, I think for a lot of women, they're doing these things. They're trying these things. They're reading your books. They're going down the pathway of modifying their diet, their exercise, all of this. Yet, they're still very menopausal and they're still suffering. Yeah. What else can you bring to them, or what else do you recommend they do to really help regulate?
Yeah. So a book that I actually wrote a long time ago, it's out there still, was called The Menopause Reset. And I came up with 5 lifestyle tools that I thought every woman over 40 should do. And I still stick by these. Okay. The first one was learning to fast, because for those women after 40, they have to learn that the brain is less sensitive to glucose and it becomes more sensitive to ketones. So the 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old woman, she is going to thrive on ketones even more than the 20 and 30-year-old. Second rule was we have to learn to cycle our food, and we've talked about this. But I like carb cycling. Like sometimes there's low carb moments and sometimes there's high carb moments. They benefit different hormones. Estrogen loves low carb living. Progesterone does better with high carb living. So learning to cycle your carbohydrates. The third was the microbiome. Work to repair your microbiome, because microbiome breaks down estrogen and the microbiome makes neurotransmitters. So for women through menopause, what also isn't being talked about is that estrogen stimulates dopamine, serotonin, acetylcholine. But these are neurotransmitters that your gut can make. So let's start to feed those microbes. Number 4 was detox. This is why I'm like in love with everything you're doing here with detox.
Thank you.
Let's take lead, for example. Lead lives in the bones. And when estrogen starts to go on her wild ride, when she's up and down through the perimenopausal years, that signals lead to come out of the bones. And lead will come out of the bones and it'll go into the brain and it'll start to create depression. It will start to create memory loss. Lead is a dumber downer. It slows everything down. So if you didn't detox before 40, you will be in much better shape through the menopausal journey if you start to detox now. This is why I'm so in love with everything you're doing with detox. The crazy menopausal symptoms are so amplified when there's a presence of a lot of toxins, especially heavy metals. And then the last one is to stop the rushing woman syndrome. And rushing woman syndrome is not a phrase that I coined. I always give Dr. Libby Weaver wrote a book called The Rushing Woman Syndrome. But you might be able to get away with rushing women or rushing woman syndrome at 35, at 45, and 55. You cannot get away with it anymore. You need to learn how to rest. You need to understand recovery. I call it courageously resting. Women going through the menopausal process need to learn to courageously rest. And when you take those 5 things and you put them into a lifestyle, menopause is not as bad as you think it would. And then you match that with the grandmother hypothesis, it's really not that bad. Why it's bad is because you are at an evolutionary mismatch with what was supposed to occur when your hormones changed.
I love that. I mean, it's such an incredible structure for how to think about all of this, but it's so all-encompassing, and I really think it'll help. And the last thing you mentioned, how we're at an evolutionary mismatch, making this so much worse for women than it used to be.
Bingo.
Right?
Thank you.
And so women lived long periods of time with, generations and generations going through menopause, and it never was such a complete disaster as it is right now.
Yeah.
We need to get back to making this a tolerable part of, or even an enjoyable part of a woman's life.
Let's think about this. I'm laughing to myself because I'm like, do we think that the cave grandmother had a hot flash? I don't know. I'm going to go and look and see if we have any documentation of that. Did she have depression and anxiety? Did she gain weight? Did she have trouble sleeping? Was she irritable? I'm actually thinking no. Because she knew what was happening to her. She knew the purpose of the reproductive system stopping. She knew that she was needed by the tribe. She wasn't tossed aside by a society that said, you look old. She was actually moving into her wise elder years where she was going to be a different version of herself that was helpful. There was a rhythm that she followed, and we are not following that rhythm right now. And society is not honoring her. Society is tossing us aside at that point in which she needs to actually be brought up. And we need to look at menopausal women and say, you are more helpful to the culture now than ever. Let's get you living in accordance with your biology.
I love that. It's such great wisdom. And you're doing so much for turning around not just individual women's health, but also the perception of this part of life for women. And, for that, I'm sure everyone thanks you. So thank you for doing everything that you do.
Thank you.
Mindy, I'm so excited about your new book, Eat Like a Girl. When can people start getting this?
It's available everywhere. I'll tell you a really fun story. So you can find it anywhere, but go to your bookstore if you can. Go support your independent bookstores. We have, the first print was over 100,000 copies. They have all left my publisher. They're all out there in the world. People are gobbling them up, so you should be able to find them at your bookstore. But anywhere that you get books.
Very cool, Mindy. I'm sure that this is going to change a lot of women's lives. So thank you for putting that out into the world. And what's next for you?
Yeah, well, I'm rhythmic. Yeah. So I've been out in the world doing a lot with both these 2 books, and now I'm kind of going inner a little bit more, and I'm writing the next book, which will be really about this brain change that happens to women. And I really want women to understand that menopause actually is working in your favor if you understand exactly what is going on from an evolutionary standpoint. And that's the next book that I'm writing.
Oh, so exciting. More women suffer from Alzheimer's than men. And I think your book will really help turn that as well, turn that tide as well.
Yes, I hope so.
So thank you for doing that. Where can people find you, Dr. Pelz?
Yeah, you can go to my website, Dr. Mindy Pelz. My passion project, and what a lot of people don't realize, is that I do 4 new YouTube videos every week on new topics. So go to YouTube and
4 a week.
4 a week. Half hour long. That's a big part of what I do.
Yeah.
Half hour videos, 4 a week, are all research backed. I answer questions that people bring to me. But yeah, my YouTube is really a large part of what I do.
Yeah, and your social media is so active too. What's your social media handle?
Yeah, my name, Dr. Mindy Pelz, across all socials. And then my podcast is the Resetter Podcast.
Yes.
And you're coming on that. We're going to talk about my experience with what you're doing here, which just blew my mind. So I can't wait to bring you to my people.
I can't wait either.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
you.
And until the next book, I'm going to have you back on for the next book.
Yes,
Hopefully you'll join me.
I would love to do
And
that.
this was such a great conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.